being here. Before we start, I would like to first pass the microphone to the director of the AGBU Papazyan Library, Lori Alvanjan.
Hello. This is bright. Can you all hear me? So, thank you all for being here today. And of course, a very special thank you to Huri and Vana and the entire Oral History Matters crew. I think I've been to all, if not most, of the Oral History Matters events in Akian Gallery, and every time I'm left feeling inspired and emotional and uplifted, and I have no doubts that this time with Vana's presentation of genocide survivor Hagop Barish, that we will all be feeling the same way again. So we don't usually do events in the library, but when this idea was presented to me by Huri, I could not say no to this opportunity. Well, when you think about it, the library is actually quite an appropriate place to host an event, host an oral history event, because at its core, oral history is about storytelling. And I don't know about you, but when I think of a place where there are lots of stories, I think of the library. And so, really hope that you enjoy today's event and see the library not just as a place for studying, but also for storytelling and also loving stories. And much like the stories in this library, there is the relationship between the reader and the author, right? And that relationship can oftentimes be very complicated and intimate. And that's very similar to what happens in oral history as well. As many of you know, the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee can also become quite complicated and intimate, and often is a story all in itself. The library is also a place where voices that have often been suppressed once or many times can finally find their home and can finally find their place to speak. And I think that that is also very similar in the world of oral history. I also want to point out that this event is happening right next to our Missouri Institute and anyway Center for Oral History, which houses many stories of genocide survivors, as well as those from the 2020 Artsakh War. And slowly, little by little, many academic institutions are having their own centers of oral history and seeing these materials as academic materials. These are research materials. And so they're getting their due respect, I think, more and more. And just finally, before I pass off this microphone and we start the presentation, I want to also just note that for a person to take the time to listen to a story, to listen to another person's story, in this world where we are constantly encouraged to do more or faster, produce more, to actually take that time is a revolutionary act. And I think that ability, our ability to feel and listen to another person's story, is slowly and slowly becoming more and more endangered. And so I just want to thank the people who tell stories, the people who love stories, and let's hear another story today. Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Before Vana starts her talk, we would like to say a few of our words of gratitude to a few people. We would like to start with the library. We would like to say a big thank you to the AGBU Papazyan Library for hosting this event. Especially, we would like to say thank you to the director, Lori Albanjan, as well as the library staff, Karen Jansizan, Hasmit Kalistyan, Manusha Kaslanyan, Armine Melikian, Ani Davidjan, and Ani Grigoryan. We would also like to say We would also like to say thank you to Bella Agakian, the former director of the library, and a very special thank you to Aras Markosan, who's not working here anymore, but she's been very important in helping us initiate these conversations. This is our long-awaited collaboration with the library, which also shows that oral history does not only exist in the Akian Gallery. It means that Akian is not our only home. It means that oral history is everywhere and that we matter everywhere. We hope this collaboration with the library will be continuous, and the library will become the space where we enrich our pursuit of storytelling and lifelong learning. We would also like to mention that our work with the library is not only about this event, but we are also working on documentation, archiving, and our very own Oral History Matters website. It will be launched very soon, so keep an eye out for that. We would also like to say our big thank you to the ICTS. They went above and beyond for making sure we had all the necessary equipment, and we know that we can always rely on their kindness and willingness to help us with our research. And of course, a big thank you to our Oral History Matters team and our exceptional Dr. Buri Gagarian. Thank you for giving our projects a second life. This is our fourth talk in the Inside House talk series that we started in November. And Inside House is a part of a larger Oral History Matters initiative, which aims to amplify the importance of oral history as a research methodology. Oral History Matters started in the August of 2023. We started with the Inside House exhibition, which hosted oral history-based capstone projects of 10 EC students. With the Inside House talks, we aim to give a closer look at each one of these projects and show why oral history matters. Reminder that next week we're having our annual Storying Lives Narrating Histories exhibition, and we will have the grand opening on April 3rd at 7 p.m. at the Akian Gallery. We will also have gallery hours from April 4th to 9th from 2 to 5 p.m. In April, we may also have our second Inner Circle conversation, which is a closed event, and we'll let you know about it more in a later date. We will resume with our Inside House talks on May 2nd with Samantha Adalia's talk featuring her graphic novel called You Are Not Armenian Enough. And we will update you on all of this and all of our upcoming events and all of our previous events on our Instagram account at Oral History Matters. So please follow us there. In a bit, Vana will present her work, and then she'll do a reading from her graphic novel, followed by a Q&A session. After that, we'll have our reception outside the library, and as always, we have in-house catering. Vana made her very famous and her favorite chocolate chip cookies. She even brought the ingredients from Dubai. She came here from Dubai, and we are very lucky to have her here because up to this point, she's been joining all of our meetings and all of our events on Zoom. So we're very lucky and very happy that Vana is here today in person. Along with the cookies, we'll also have Vati Oshara, rose syrup, because of its quintessential link with Aleppo. And you'll hear more about why it connects with Aleppo through Vana's story. And over there by the entrance, you might have seen, it's our oral history wall, where we have different sections. One of the sections is the postcards from our oral history exhibitions, Storying Lives, Narrating Histories. We also have pictures from our previous talks and postcards. So please make sure to take a look at those pictures. And we'll keep adding them. If you see Vana's is empty, and we'll add the pictures of Vana's event during our next event in May. After many complaints during our previous talks, we now finally have tissues where you can find them there. A lot of people said that we did not have tissues during our previous talks, so we listened, you say, and we listened. And speaking of that, we also have a guest book that would very much like to hear your comments, but also please don't forget to write your names so we know who wrote each comment. Now I'll read Vana's bio and then she'll proceed with her talk. Vana Anbarson graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and Communications from the American University of Armenia. Her research interests focus on the life stories of individuals whose importance extends beyond their childhood past. She incorporates the method of oral history and visual imagery, such as digital illustrations, to depict her research projects. Vana is one of the founding members of Oral History Matters, and she is currently working to produce video for EmaHay, an Armenian community in UAE. The floor is yours, Vana.
Something you should know about me is that I'm a very talkative person. I enjoy sharing my day with someone who shows interest in listening to me speak. It demonstrates that someone cares about what I have to say. While that might not seem like such a big deal, sharing a mundane, uneventful story when I could be telling a treacherous anecdote, it is in cases such as these that we unconsciously toss aside stories of people's day-to-day lives and rule them out as unimportant in comparison to a person's more engrossing past. One example are the survivors of Armenian Genocide. When we think of genocide survivors, what is the first thing that comes to mind? It's how much they suffered. And when it comes to interviewing said survivors, what are the questions we typically ask them? How did you flee? What challenges did you face? Did you lose any loved ones? What did you bear witness to? Were there any traumatic experiences that you had to endure? How did you survive? These are the types of attention-seeking questions people commonly ask survivors to convey. A crucial part of the knowledge we manage to gain about our history lies in the eyes and ears of those who were present in the massacre that was the Armenian Genocide. Those people are deemed important. And once they settled into their new homes, whether it's in Syria or someplace else, and established a new life, why is it that we never checked up on these people again long after they started fresh? A case such as genocide is not an experience one can easily walk away from. It can do irreparable damage to one's mental and emotional self. It is a traumatic experience. So to what extent did the crimes of humanity affect the survivors in moving forward in life? And I'm not just referring to the adults. It's also important to note that there were a lot of children involved who suffered greatly from this mass murder. And children are very impressionable. So a question we should also be asking ourselves is, what became of the lives of those children? And did the survivors adopt any unusual behaviors from the ordeal that ultimately affected their personality as time went on? I remember when my mom, very casually, just randomly, brought up my great-grandfather with no prior context. At the time, never in my 21 years have I ever heard of this man's existence. Not a single family member ever mentioned him. Maybe there was never a good time or place to bring him up. So how this man crossed my mom's train of thought while doing the dishes is something I'll never be able to wrap my head around. My mom went on to explain how she remembered the story my grandmother had shared with her about how this person was referred to as a madman for his unexplained antics. My mom chuckled when she looked back on those stories. She never met him, but there was always something she found intriguing about the anecdotes people used to tell. Whereas I was dumbfounded. Who is this man, and why is he relevant now? His name was Hagop Barish, and he was a young genocide survivor. He fled from Mardin, a mountainous city located in southern Anatolia in western Armenia, when he was just a boy. He witnessed the slaughter of 7 members of his family in his hometown while he escaped from imminent death with his sisters and brother to Syria. Despite his difficult start in life, he managed to grow up to be a well-respected man. He was also an artist of many sorts. He was a musician, a photographer, a painter, an artisan, and even at some point, a teacher and a policeman. He was also pretty much a perfectionist. Every item in the house had a designated spot. Not a single thing should be out of place. But when he became a father and had kids of his own, more than anything, he wanted his children, the Barish children, to be well-mannered at all times. So when his children weren't behaving by their father's standards, it genuinely infuriated him, and they were heavily disciplined. And by discipline, I mean punished in a similar fashion to when the Ottomans tortured the Armenians. When I first heard these stories, I was baffled as to why would someone humiliate and torture their own flesh and blood in such a horrifying manner. It was extremely bizarre. Everyone in the family thought so too. The mention of his name or recalling these events was perceived as a ghost story. I kept wondering, why? Why would someone be influenced to use such drastic measures for a form of punishment when they themselves witnessed the very outcome of such a heinous act? It's when I realized that such a method, in the eyes of a young child, proved to be highly effective in putting people in line. So it would make sense that he would adopt the only method he was exposed to and discipline his own kids, even if the punishment did not fit the crime. I always wondered why I never knew about any of this, why it took me so long to hear my family's history. I always thought I was the curious child who questioned everything. But it seemed like my curiosity never reached that far, apparently, since I was so oblivious about my ancestors. But then again, who isn't? I'm actually curious right now, how many of you in the audience asked a question to a family member or questioned yourselves about your family's history and how it came to be? Just raise your hand if you have ever asked yourselves, who got you here? Oh, wow. Well, if you ask me, there's a lot of oral history potential. One thing I want you all to know is that oral history is everywhere. I know I'm asking a lot of questions, when really I should be providing answers to said questions, but that's pretty much what it's like to be an oral historian. You never stop questioning. You never stop wondering. You never stop listening. You never stop caring. It's hard to stop, because if you stop, you'll risk the losing chance, the opportunity to discover your personal history. I'm the 4th generation, and it wasn't until I started my senior year at AUA that I realized, wow, this all happened? And if I found out any later, I would have lost my most valuable source. And that's my teta. Teta, by the way, is my grandmother. That's what I call her in Arabic. Hagop Barish had 7 children, and all of the children had aged and passed, all except my teta. During the research for my capstone, she fell gravely ill. While we were hanging on to hope that she'd recover, I found myself already grieving. The main reason was that I was about to lose my last grandparent. But the other reason was that I was about to lose my most vital source, a witness of past events that could relay information with great accuracy to be documented for future generations besides my own. I felt like I was about to lose my entire family history in the form of my teta right before my very eyes. Thankfully, my mom flew to Syria and did her best to nurse her back to health as much as she could. Right now, Teta is still in Syria in good health and in good hands. And thanks to her, this whole graphic novel wouldn't have been possible without her or my mom. Actually, thanks to my mom's visit, she's managed to gather a lot more information from my teta. And even they held a small oral history session of their own. My mom recorded her, asked questions, hung on to her every word, and even she learned something new from my teta she'd never known about. Oral history is everywhere. And because my teta was so invested in helping me with my project, she did some digging of her own and got in contact with her niece from Venezuela to send old photographs of my great-grandfather. We unfortunately lost all the albums during the war in Syria that contained Hagop Barish's incredibly huge collection of photographs that he took over the course of his life and his family. Somehow, Hagop Barish managed to get not just the 4th, the 3rd, but the 2nd generations to invest in oral history about him beyond the grave. How wild is that, you guys? With all that being said, I wanted my capstone to be a creative project, with the main subject revolving around the life of a survivor after the 1915 Armenian massacre in a graphic style appropriate to the tragic events. So why a graphic novel? I wanted to depict the narrative told by my family, and I can't express all the hardships people went through just by talking about it alone. I wanted the reader to connect with the people involved in the story on a deep level, get a better sense of everyone's perspectives and suffering through visual imagery. At first, I wanted to create a film, but I quickly shut that idea down when I realized I'd need to reenact an entire genocide. Not happening. That was when I got the idea to create a graphic novel instead, after I had taken Mikan Birberian's graphic novel course and found myself enjoying the process of making illustrations. The graphic novel is divided into 2 sections. The first half sheds light on the cruelty witnessed by the survivors, specifically in the city of Mardin, and the suffering of its residents and Hagop's family's members during the ordeal. The second half highlights Hagop's life after his deportation and the long-term effects he suffered. In order to depict the massacre in Mardin, I found that this city is also the one place in the Ottoman Empire that provides us with a relatively complete day-by-day account of the persecution of Armenians and the rest of the other Christian denominations. And due to its geographical location, the citizens of Mardin managed to see for many miles along the main road leading to Diyarbakir and even further into the Syrian border, witnessing the caravans of deportees coming from the northern provinces who walked their way to death camps of Deir Zor. So a lot of survivors, such as Jacques Retore's testimonies, were taken and documented in books. Since the novel was mainly text and illustration based, I needed to write a script based on the research information and the testimonies that were collected. These testimonies were sorted according to dates and locations, and I transferred these texts into a file that I used as dialogue to include in my graphic novel. in addition to names of people mentioned in the testimonies of victims and perpetrators to add credibility. Since the first 7 years of Hagop Barish's life, as in particular in Mardin, it was crucial to find some of these testimonies of the city's residents. But as for the rest of Barish's time in Syria, I needed to hold an oral history interview with my mom, Tanya Khachatur. I mentioned before that all the information I've accumulated about him was from both my mom and Teta. But because of Teta's circumstances at the time, my mom was the only one I could rely on to share Barish's tale on Teta's behalf. All this was vital for the first half of the graphic novel that deals with what happened during the Armenian Genocide and the Mardin massacre. In turn, this highlights the repercussions of the tragic events more clearly in the second half of the novel, focusing heavily on Barish's life, his survival, and his deportation to settle in Syria, to illustrate the result of witnessing those tragic events and the impact of trauma during fatherhood. The drawing process was the most time-consuming part of the capstone. Before I could even get to work, I needed to find a suitable art style. There are a lot of graphic novels related to mass violence, and the style of each novel differs from the other. For example, the novelist Jeron Jansen wrote a novel called Muzungu, which touches upon the genocidal events in Rwanda. The novel itself is rich with shapes, colors, and angles. But the style I believed that would suit my novel had to be simple yet effective, similar to Paulo Cossi's graphic novel, which also deals with the Armenian Genocide, called massacres. He focused on delivering expressions on a simple and clear panel with shades of gray for coloring rather than using it to intensify shadows. For my capstone, the structural backgrounds were just as vital as a character's expressions, as they represented the location of real places taken before, during, and after the genocide, and I made sure to use them as references. The color scheme for the novel was inspired by vintage photographs of soft brown and cream tints, as opposed to the classic black and white colors. The choice of the Old West color scheme serves two purposes. The first is that the events of the massacre took place when Hagop was young, when looking back on his past. From his perspective, it's all desaturated in color, like a flashback. Even when viewing Barish in the present as an adult in the novel, everything is still desaturated because the era of colored photographs hadn't yet been invented. The second purpose is, I've mentioned one of Hagop's many hobbies was photography. This was a way to pay homage to all the countless photos taken of him and his family over the decades that are sadly lost. This graphic novel has been one of the most complex, mentally challenging projects I have ever done. Going in, I thought it would be at least somewhat enjoyable to do since most of my time would be spent drawing each panel. Not to say that it wasn't. However, I found myself on multiple occasions pulling all-nighters almost daily at some point during April and May, attempting to make as much progress within a specific time frame as possible. I was proud of the work I was doing. Into each individual page, it brought me so much joy for just finishing a blank page with illustrations. I was truly grateful I didn't experience any technical difficulties that would have resulted in the loss of my progress, nor did I experience a serious case of art block besides minor ones. If anything, I had more of an issue tackling some panels I deemed time-consuming or intimidating, and therefore put them off. Instead, I drew what excited me most, or had a clear motive to complete first. Of course, I had sketched out a storyboard of the entire novel, start to finish, before I dove into the actual drawing process, and used it as a map to stay on track with what pages were in progress or incomplete. I did need to pull out quite a few reference photos, not just of Mardin and photographs of the genocide itself, but other miscellaneous items like an old view camera or house, and sometimes photos of people in large groups to use as guide for making silhouettes like a classroom or a crowd. I even used references from comics on how artists utilized lines to create simple motion and movement, or how the text bubbles were displayed when the characters interacted. I must say, adding the text was when I felt like the novel was coming together beautifully, as it was the last thing I did after I finished all the drawings. I could not express the relief I felt after the countless time and energy I had put into this novel. In all the time I spent drawing, there was a period where I had forgotten whom I was making this novel for, and I lost sight of what I was working toward. In that brief period, I debated whether it would have been far more optimal if I had gone about this project with a different creative approach, like writing a script or making that film. Would it have been any different from making a graphic novel? It wasn't until I went back and reviewed all the materials I had gathered, the interview, the research, and revisited the story I had written and drawn. It was then that I recalled the purpose of this project. It was like I was rediscovering the anecdotes all over again. I could also easily recount the tales I was told, but revisiting the project in its completed state was when I felt rejuvenated and embraced every aspect of this capstone with the same energy as when I started. I want people to know, to be informed, that a person's life shouldn't just be centered around what challenges they overcame in the past because it sounds interesting, just like how a person's dull day-to-day life shouldn't be overlooked because it lacks interest. We all know that for every action, there is a reaction, but people only stick around for the action, not what comes next. There are a lot of people who suffered silently the same way Hagop Barish had, and only when they grew up were the traumatic effects exhibited in the way they behaved, reacted, or treated loved ones. But nobody considered the after effects this event could lead to, which is why a case like this and many others went under the radar. Countless individuals like him have endured unspeakable hardships, their voices silenced by the passage of time. It's a sobering reminder of the collective responsibility we bear to honor and preserve these narratives, lest they fade into oblivion. This journey has taught me that our stories are the very essence of who we are, and it is through the act of listening, of bearing witness, that we honor the lives that came before us, ensuring that their legacy endures for generations to come.
Thank you so much, Vana. Now let's give Vana a few seconds to breathe before she reads an excerpt from the beginning of her graphic novel, Hagop Barish, a genocide survivor's life story. And just a reminder that there will be a Q&A session after Vana reads the part. And before Vana starts, I would like to give a warning that there will be emotional and trauma triggers, since this is a genocide survival story. Ready when you are, Vana.
Ready. Hagop Barish, a genocide survivor's life story. With deep reverence, this literary work is dedicated to the Barish family and the souls who perished in the Armenian Genocide. In the year 1915, in the distant surrounding plains, far along the main road to Diyarbakir and close to the Syrian border, lay a historic city in western Armenia known as Mardin, the city of the sun. It had a remarkable collection of buildings stacked on one another that stood proudly amidst the rolling hills of southern Anatolia. The streets of this enchanting city hummed with life. With its rich cultural heritage, one could not help but marvel at the ancient churches that adorned the skyline that bore witness to the Christian heritage of Mardin. However, the peaceful facade of Mardin would soon be shattered as the impending storm of the Armenian Genocide approached. The very buildings that had borne witness to centuries of coexistence would become silent witnesses to the unspeakable horrors that were to unfold. Mardin, 1915. June 3rd. From the balcony of Dominican monk Jacques Bedore. What is that over there at Omar Agha's water spring? A great caravan advances like a herd of sheep. I must pull out my binoculars. An end must be put to their existence, however criminal the measures taken may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex, nor to conscientious scruples. Talat Pasha. St. George Church. Ignatius Maloyan, you are hereby under arrest by order of Governor Badri Bey and Police Chief Mamduh Bey. Come out with your hands up. Under arrest? But what for? Accused of planning a revolution and hiding weapons and bombs, that's what. With all due respect, gentlemen, you've searched the church once before and found nothing. Are you accusing us of lying? We'll see to it that you'll admit to your crimes in prison. And I'm certain you won't need this filth anymore. Let us out. We're loyal to the state. We're no traitors. Holy Father, we warned you. You should have left Mardin. Well, I could have saved my own skin. A good shepherd can never truly abandon his herd unless one were to get lost. Confess, you incompetent twat. I won't stop until you confess. Where are the weapons? Answer me at once, or your wife and children will suffer the same, if not worse sentences, as you lie here, helpless behind these prison bars. What's all that commotion? Baba? Don't you dare get anywhere near me or my family. There are no exceptions to your crimes. You must pay for it. All of you, open fire! Mama! Hagop? Honey, what's wrong? I saw them killing. They're killing Baba. He's going to die. We have to help him. A bunch of people in hats and boots with guns are killing everyone in the streets. Baba was there, and so were Alexander and Francisco, and what? Hagop, listen carefully. I need you to be very brave right now and get your younger siblings, George, Jamil, and Lucia, to the Syrian border. It's a long journey, but I promise it's safe. I'll pack your food so you can leave at once. What about you, Baba, and everyone else? I'll find them, but I need you to be responsible and protect our family until I come back, okay? As the Barish children tearfully kissed their mom, unaware their embrace would be her last, they clung to each other through the terrain, following the lead of other adults and their children, their kids, who, much like them, were trying to flee the city from the mass slaughter. The blood-curdling cries and gunfire slowly died down the more distance they covered, but faint rounds of shots still rang through the landscape. The thought the food Hagop carried might be the last meal his mom cooked dawned on him as he clenched his supper. Meanwhile, women and children were captured in the terrorized city, but their sentencing was put off. Of the victims, a mother and her 3 kids managed to take advantage of their opportunity and met an Arab man willing to make a deal with the Resho family. The Resho family is home. What would it take to flee the city with my children? I only ask for 4 gold pieces, ma'am. 1 for you and each child. Sir, this is all I have. Please, I'm begging you. Spare my family from suffering the cruel fate. Please allow us to use your donkey to make it across the Syrian border so that my children can live a full life. In God's name, please help us. I'm no monster, so I'll make an exception. You can take my donkey. However, I'll only assist you halfway through the journey. As for the rest, you're on your own. Thank you very much, sir. Just sit tight, Atia. Just sit tight in the hooch, Atia. True to his word, the Arab man guided the family out of harm's way and accompanied them on their travel. Having been forced to leave their once home behind, the mother of the tree looked back on the dirt road to the city now left in the hands of thieves to be raided, trashed, or used to hold captives for brutal torment. Her heart ached watching her birthplace, her mother home, run by savages who showed no mercy to the young and frail. She and her children were the lucky few who escaped as a family from the close encounter without being spotted. The mother returned her gaze to the track ahead. The path beneath her was not only the road to freedom, but was her children's only chance at a future. A future that was only met with the aid of a stranger lending his mule to cover the remote track. Upon reaching the midpoint, the man allowed his donkey to assist the family onward, following the trail, much to their relief. After what seemed like hours, the family finally reached their destination. Standing before them was the castle that signified the end of their fear and trepidation, their new forever home, Aleppo, Syria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vana. And thank you everyone for being here and for sitting through this harrowing story as well. And thank you, Vana, for the justice you did to the story of Hagop Barish, but also his wife Atia. And what we see here is the end of the first part when both children, Hagop and Atia, reach Aleppo, the safe haven that was Aleppo at that time for many, many survivors. And that's where the second part will take you to, which you can read when you borrow the book from the library.
To be continued.
To be continued, yes. So we're opening the floor to questions now, and it's your questions. Samantha, you have the first question.
Hi, Vana.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming here, sharing this story, reading it aloud for us. And I was just emotional first when we were preparing for this talk and as you spoke there, because I know the journey that you went through this. And while we were both studying under Dr. Atarian, we were both doing graphic novels at the time, and I knew that it wasn't an easy one. And I'm thankful that you were also there to just share our stories of making graphic novels together. And hearing you read this was also very powerful. And I remember the time you gave me a copy of this and I was reading on the metro, and I wanted to cry when I was reading it there. And I'm really grateful that you chose to tell this, even if it's very painful. But I think when you chose to draw this and make all of the illustrations in the story, there's a great weight off your chest as well. And I thank your family who's here as well for supporting you through all of this. And my question is also related to that process. I remember that before we had the Oral History Matters event, you wanted to print your graphic novel for that. And I remember you were with your dad in the printing process. So can you tell us a bit more of that and the connection, family connection again?
I didn't just want to leave it as a PDF. I felt like it needed to be published. Still working on that, published to have a physical copy of it. And to my luck, my dad was a creative director in a printing company, and I got him to help me out with this project, and it became like an entire family project, not just like my grandmother and my mom, and I got my dad involved. And well, we started off with just like printing like a, what is it? I forgot what it's called, a spiral notebook at first, just to see what it looked like. It was like a really glossy finish and all that, but we took, as we were like trying to find the perfect materials, went from like cardboard, we took like, it took about like 7 tries until we found the right cover and the right paper that we wanted the novel to be and feel so that you can read comfortably. And during the process, my dad and I were going through the graphic novel, and when he started like helping me out, what about how we do this as a design and this as a that, like he started pitching in on how we can make the graphic novel visually appealing, in the sense that like the order of we put this text here and we put that like the text here, for example. I'm just talking about the back cover and the front cover, that's mostly it, like the back here, stuff like that. So he helped me pitch in. We improved the graphic novel together as well, and enjoyed our time doing it. Thank you.
Yes,
Any more questions?
yeah, I have.
Vana, welcome back.
Thank
And
you.
first of all, congratulations on doing this work. It must have been very tiring because, well, I love visual novels and comic books, and I follow them. I have huge collections, and having this kind of narrative told in this way is immense work. So let's give Vana a round of applause for that.
Thank you so much.
You mentioned a lot about the creative process, looking at other artists, figuring out the color theme, and from the looks of it also, from what we've seen so far, you've spent a lot of time shading, working, hard lines, storyboard as you mentioned, but you've also mentioned that it was the most mentally challenging project again. What was the most challenging part in that?
The most challenging part for me was that I need to get this done. I need to get this done now and quick. I started off with such enthusiasm, just hearing all these stories, and I'm like, I'm ready to do it. And as I'm working and working and working and working, and it's endless, you guys, it's never ending, it's not finishing. And then I'm starting to see that time is running out. I'm starting to I'm writing and drawing everything at such a slow pace. I need to pick up the pace. And so I start sacrificing nights of sleep, not getting any rest, worrying about exams and deadlines, and instead of having to actually enjoy the process and appreciate the entire thing. It wasn't until it was finished that I was like, wow, I'm actually done. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a break. That was way too much work. I am mentally exhausted. And then I looked back on the project and I'm like, wow, I did that. It's like, I remember this. And I looked back on the previous pages and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's right. I remember working on this page. I remember doing this design. I remember how much I was trying to make it so I was being such a perfectionist. I wonder who I got that one from.
I have 2 follow-up questions from what you've asked. One of them is there's so many entertaining comics and visual novels out there. So many entertaining ones that sometimes you look at pages of violence and death it's there just for the entertainment or the
comedic relief.
Yeah, sometimes even that. But with this one, it was a more heavy story. How was that? How did that feel for you as you turned that into actual ink on paper, I guess numbers on the screen?
I didn't look at it as hey, the thing is, when I was working on the comic and I was trying to find comics that I can use as a reference, I wasn't looking at action-packed comics. I was looking at more the related comics, the more heavy burden comics. The only time I actually looked at any comics was like, what if I wanted to do like a particular motion, like I wanted to do zip, or like the motion of the falaqa as it was moving. I'm like, how can I make that work? And I'm like looking at all the other comics and just to see and get an idea, and I realized they had poof and pound and bomb, and then I'm like, well, that's not gonna work. But I'm sorry, I forgot your questions. But
No, I think you answered it, and you answered
Okay.
my follow-up question, which was, are we going to see the torture scene if we continue watching? Reading the comic. So thank you,
Yeah.
Vana.
Thank you.
Yes, Barish.
A follow-up to Rana's first question. You mentioned that the time was very of the essence, and at some point you were doing it, working very, sacrificing a lot of sleep, and were picking up the pace. How
I
how
know,
much
you were
that
there,
had-
you saw me.
I didn't need to hear that. I saw it. I was out of the house just so that you don't yell. Anyways, but my question was, do you think that all this chaotic moments has affected the way that this piece have came out? Do you regret anything? Because in a spur of the moment, you might have sacrifices, maybe something doing like drawing wise or whatever. Would you go back if there is something that you think that is missing there? Would you still go back and remaster it?
I wouldn't go back to remaster it, but I would go back to add to it. I'm quite happy with how everything turned out, even if it felt like a bit of a rush. And I kind of wanted to include a lot more details because during the interview I had with my mom there was a lot of stories that I could not fit into the actual graphic novel that I had to kind of put away for the time being because it was not going to fit in. But I would love to continue to work on it and include those stories and add anything else that I keep finding about Hagop Barish because this man keeps surprising me somehow.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
You can just pass it.
Hello, Vana.
Hi.
I haven't seen you since last year. Hello, and
It's nice to see you as well.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask a question about the project. Are you thinking to basically translate it to the Armenian or Syrian or the other languages if you think it's necessary?
I do actually. I kind of really want to make a translated version of this graphic novel in Arabic so that my grandma can read it. My grandma, she's an Armenian, but she doesn't speak Armenian, and so it's funny that she's the one who told me those stories, and I wrote those stories in the graphic novel, and she can't read them. So, and we have to tell her what I wrote, which is funny because. But I really want to have an Arabic version, and if you guys want to maybe work on an Armenian version, so the story can get to more people. I feel like I should have made an Armenian version saying this is an Armenian genocide story. Of course I had to do that. Completely forgot about that. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
Shahen, you have a question, right?
Hi, Vana.
Hi.
It was amazing. And I told you yesterday that I always have your capstone open on my computer because I'm writing my capstone at the moment, and it's an inspiration for me. And now that you talked about it and you read part of your research creation piece, it's amazing and it's very beautiful. I would congratulate you for that.
Thank you very much.
I have this question. It may sound a bit strange, but since in terms of style I'm doing something very much similar to your capstone, how much connected did you feel to your piece while you were writing the research creation part, and did you feel like sharing it with other people, with that you were going to lose a part of yourself as an author and as a person, and if yes, then what did you do to overcome that fear as a local person, as a person?
I felt extremely connected because, well, like I said, this is a huge part of my family's history, and it took me so long to realize that. And it's so odd that someone who got you to this point, you don't even know their name, you don't even know how much they suffered, what they sacrificed to get to the point that they are there, and then you coming out of that family and just existing because of how many people have sacrificed, have died. Of course, I feel a lot more connected to my grandfather. I feel a lot more connected to my grandmother at the same time, because I feel like just hearing my mom talk about it, my grandmother talking about it, I feel like now I get to talk about it, and I feel like talking about it with other people is incredibly crucial, because I found out actually that Hagop Barish isn't the only person who suffered, who dealt with the same ordeal and suffered the same way. A lot of other people have too. I've had a distant family member told me like, oh, I had someone who did the exact same thing, and I'm like, wait, really? I'm like, yeah, like they acted this way, they acted that, because they also had to deal with this stuff, and I'm like, wow, I feel like you're almost describing him, you know that? And it doesn't have to just be about the genocide. Like people who also have dealt with war suffer the same way. Some people have suffered the same way. I had a mutual friend told me that, like, oh, you remember when this person was like acting this way because they used to do this in the past. Like they saw them how like they were torturing this person, and then they adapted that to their discipline for him. And I'm like, that is incredibly awful. And I did not realize how much, like how known it was, not how known it was, how do I describe it? It's like prevalent. And that gave me more of a reason to like share this story with other people. It doesn't take away from my family's history. I just want to share more about my family's history with others that others can relate to. Thank you
for sharing this story with us. You have done a really fantastic job. Congratulations and bravo.
Thank you very much.
I have a request to you. On behalf of library staff, we're so happy, so thankful to you for enriching library collection with such a valuable publication. Now I'm asking your permission, would you mind if we add this publication to institutional repository, and it will reach a great number of people?
Oh my God, yes. I would love to. Oh my God.
Digital platform where we are adding all publications from the faculty, the students, my staff, and we will be more than happy to add this collection to the institutional repository by your permission.
Thank you very much. I would be honored. Thank you.
Hi, Vana.
Hi.
The title of your presentation today was very much interesting for me. That's why I attended, and I'm very glad. Thank you very much for sharing your great-grandmother's story.
Thank you for attending.
You mentioned that it involved your grandmother, your mother, and your father in this process. I was wondering if any other family members, you got to connect with any other first cousins, second cousins, and they got to be involved, or you just got to share the story with them that they didn't know that they were part of it.
Thank you for the question. Actually, we're still because I was working on this story. My grandmother, who had a lot more connections to her nieces and nephews, was basically just spreading the word. I'm like, hey, Vana is working on this graphic novel. It's about your great-grandfather, like your grandfather. And they were also starting to kind of pitch in and like she was asking like, hey, do you have any photographs of this? Do you have any photographs of that I could send to Vana that could help her? And then they were also on board. They sent photographs, and I'm still receiving photographs of like some of the items or like stories that are related to this particular event. And I'm getting all these like pictures, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's exactly like my graphic novel. Okay, maybe not that much, but like also it looks exactly like it. And then I get photographs of Hagop Barish and the family members, and I'm like, oh my god, she was like my grandma looks so young, Atia looks amazing, and then my grandfather in his police uniform, and I'm like, how did that happen? And I'm still being told like these stories of how he got how he became a policeman, how he's a teacher, and I'm like, I'm still learning new stuff about him. And once the graphic novel was done, my grandma was sharing all the graphic novel about with the other family members, and they were just as happy and pleased to hear it because Hagop Barish is being forgotten. So just hearing about him is just making family members happy again, even if it's like a tragic event. It's just nice to know that that we are still remembering his name in a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Vana, for the emotional and sensitive story. You briefly talked about the colors, right? The beige, the blacks and whites, and the browns, and the occasionally affected reds. And I want to ask, what is the deeper significance of the color palette that you chose to use?
The color palette, because of the most of the graphic novels, again, were in, like I've seen, are black and white or in color. I don't see much of the cream colored ones, so I wanted to use that as like my inspiration, because like there are black and white photographs, but there was also like these cream colored photographs and the beige photographs, and I wanted to again pay homage to my great-grandfather, and I used like 5 particular colors to just stick with. I use there's even names for them. Like I have them right here. Like there was like a big scone color that I used just to highlight the all like whatever the characters, the items, the places, the locations. And there's a radio dust. It's funny, but that one I used as a background color. I used all black for the highlights and just to show a bit of shadow to some of the like boots, hats, that sort of thing. Everything I decided to like keep these primary colors, except for the red, which I wanted to make that one exception that this is a powerful moment, and I felt like no cream colored, black, white color was ever going to emphasize how much of a traumatic event that was. So I made that one exception for the red.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vana, I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you, first of all, for this very nuanced storying of the work that you did and the process that you went through to show what the afterlife of stories is about, and what the afterlife of oral history is about, what the afterlife of a life story is about. And you also talked quite well to like the amount of research that you did, the archival research that you did, that also comes through so much also in the graphic aspect of what you did. And you and I have talked so much how much in love I am with how you depicted Mardin, how there's so much detail in that. But this question is about this particular image, which also became the cover of your book, became the cover of your graphic novel. what is Hagop seeing as he looks into the mirror, basically here? And I wish you could kind of go back into it. This has a very, very deep significance for you. And why did you choose to have this image as the cover of the book as well?
For the cover, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. It was kind of confusing. I was originally going to do something that, like, of young Hagop Barish in the field of the genocide, the massacre, but then I was like, but the rest of the story is also about him as a grown-up. And I was confused as to what I wanted to do for the cover, so I decided to leave that for the time being. I'm like, I'll figure something out. As I finished my first chapter of my graphic novel and I was going to move on to the second chapter, I realized that I was missing an important link, and that was the transition between chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 1 with him being young, and chapter 2 being him as an adult and now living his day-to-day life. How was I going to let people know that this old gentleman is the young boy you saw a couple of pages ago? I didn't want to tell people, like, as a reader, I didn't want them to, like, hey, by the way, this is him, that's the guy. I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want people to make that connection for themselves. So I wanted to find a way to somehow include both his younger self and his older self. So I was like, do I do a time skip? Do I just show him, like, going through a door and just, like, bam, he's old now? I'm like, no, that's not it. My mom told me that Hagop Barish used to own a huge wardrobe. And this wardrobe had really intricate designs of, like, dragons and angels, which is weird because, like, these two kind of aren't really correlated together. But it was very common in Syria, or, like, grandparents and families to have these ginormous wardrobe with these intricate designs and carved statues. It was, like, huge. And on those wardrobes there was, like, a mirror. And I couldn't, okay, sorry about that. And I was like, what if I had Hagop Barish look in the mirror and just see himself as the young version of him? I wanted to include Atiya, his wife. The wardrobe he bought was actually, he bought it on his wedding day. He bought it for his bride. And I wanted to include Atiya there as her, like, in person, and her reflection remains the same as her present self. But with Hagop Barish, I wanted him that whenever he looks in the reflection, he always sees his younger self and not the present adult that he is. I just felt like he sees himself like he doesn't think he changed. He still thinks he's like that young little boy. And I connected to that very much because a couple of years ago, for my oral history narrative, I did an interview with my mom again, but this is about the Syrian war and how she overcame it. And I was very little when we left Syria. And when my mom was telling me all the huge, tragic things that happened, like, I knew the war was bad, but I just didn't know how bad it was because my mom was shielding me from all the horrible things that could have traumatized me at that age. And as a grown-up, reflecting on that, I was looking back and, like, my young self, my young innocent little self had no idea how much of a terrible situation she was in. And I felt like I was really affected as an adult. And that's why I related to it, because I kind of saw myself in the cover, in this particular page, that I was, like, looking back, just, like, seeing my little innocence and then being affected as an adult. And I just really correlated with Hagop Barish in that moment, and I decided that's what I want my cover to be.
Thank you, Vana.
Thank you. And
Congratulations on your capstone.
thank you.
My question is more about the psychology
psychological part, and not for you, but one, did you explore like PTSD, trauma, like how for Hagop Barish? I'm guessing the story is about how he treated, like how he was in life because of his trauma. How did you explore that? How did you do the research? I mean, on psychology.
It's mostly I used my teta's examples. She used to rant about how much she didn't like the way Hagop Barish used to like punish her and her siblings, and all the treacherous thing that he did. He loved his kids, but also it was just he would have these unexplained outbursts, and no one knew why. My grandma didn't know why. No one had an explanation for it, and it wasn't until I was looking through like genocide, the testimonies, the stories, and I found out that people used to. Oh, I don't know if I should even share this. Okay, we'll share it just a little bit. People used to use the falaqa, like with the feet. They used to wrap the people's feet and used to like bang them. And I'm like, that sounds very similar to what a certain person did. And I'm like, that's when I realized, and I made the correlation that like, oh, he must have like witnessed this thing. He's seen it in person. It's the only form of torture he's ever, not torture, it's the only form of discipline he's ever seen that would put people in line. And he used that on his children. And my grandma and all of her siblings always put the blame on him for just being the madman that he is with no explanation. And Hagop Barish himself never really shared as much information about his childhood because it was extremely traumatizing. So I did research about Mardin, where he came from, and I found out that there was a lot of things that just so happened to have the Barish family's name during this event when it took place, and I realized that, oh wait, this is his family, this is his mom, this is his dad. Wait, hold on, wait a minute. I'm like, and I remember what my grandma told me is that he had to leave his mom and his family behind with his remaining siblings, and then that's when I started making all the connections. Like, this must be what traumatized him. And I'm sorry, it's just hope that answers your question. I'm just gonna stop it there.
Yes, Sona has a question. Yes, Sona.
First of all, thank you so much for your presentation today, and also thank you for your beautifully written capstone proposal. I'm currently also making a graphic novel, oral history-based graphic novel.
Sona?
Yes.
Okay.
And your proposal and your project is serving as a really great example of what to do. And the one thing I'm having a lot of trouble with is killing my darlings in a way, cutting out parts of the story, picking what the end result is going to be because of the limited time that we have. And I wanted to ask how you managed that, how you did that, because there's just so much that comes out from the process of oral history, and then to pick out parts and create a concise storyline is very difficult. And yeah, I just wanted to hear from you.
I completely understand what you mean, because I had to sacrifice a lot of stories that I wish I could add, but I couldn't because of the time crunch I was on. What I did to try to figure out how I wanted my graphic novel to sound start to finish was that I decided to sketch out every panel on paper before I even started illustrating. I wanted to make sure, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about that. I have to make sure to include this important factor, and I had to is there any way I can somehow squeeze this little tiny information about this little particular event? As much as I wanted to, I couldn't. And sometimes I kind of just try to convince myself, okay, maybe if you don't split tonight. You could finish it tomorrow. You can't include it. I don't know if it was worth it. I'm like, the graphic novel is definitely worth it. Sleep, debatable. Sleep was I was really considering I can put off 3 days of sleep, no problem. Just drink tea, just drink coffee. Don't do that, by the way. So my advice would be just write everything that you genuinely want. Under no circumstances that you don't want to include, that you genuinely want to have these events in your story. And if there's ever a time that you do have available time that you want to include it, save it at the very end. And if you think you can, okay, just keep a little space there, or maybe have a separate page for it that you know you'll be able to include something there. But focus on what you genuinely want to convey in the graphic novel. You don't want to make any sacrifices for it, and then whatever time you have, you can include it. Are you with Huri, Tarian, by the way? She'll give you a bit more time. She'll give you a bit more time. Don't tell anyone. Sorry.
Except that it's going to be online and everyone is going to hear it, but yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. Any other questions? More questions? Vana, I'm going to thank you again and again very deeply for telling such a difficult story in such a sensitive way. By the way, Vana and I were talking today, and she was showing me that the family heirloom that was the wardrobe was found very, very recently. So this wardrobe where Hagop is looking at his young self, at his child self, still exists. It's there, and it's part of the story. And that is another story, that how inanimate objects tell the stories even when we pass on. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Vana, for telling this story and for, again, reminding us how precious family stories are and how their meaning starts getting compounded actually through generations in a very, very fascinating way. And we can continue the rest of this conversation right outside the library, having the cookies that Vana has made for us, and sipping rose syrup, homemade rose syrup that is, at least for me, a very quintessential Aleppo experience. So we'll continue the conversation right outside. Thank you.